I reckon I probably hold the unofficial world record for an HOA Karen calling 911 on a state trooper for the egregious offense of existing on his own property. Yes, you heard that right. Not for speeding, not for a noise complaint that actually violated an ordinance, but for simply driving my own vehicle, on my own land, a good country mile from her meticulously curated domain of beige. Buckle up, folks, because this tale of suburban delusion reaching new heights is one for the books. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. And definitely share if you've ever had the distinct displeasure of encountering an individual who believed their HOA handbook superseded actual state law, because you're going to find this particularly validating. My story isn't just about a rogue HOA president. It's about the spectacular implosion that occurs when unchecked entitlement collides with the unyielding reality of the law, especially when the target of that entitlement is the law. My sanctuary, my escape from the world, is a sprawling couple of 100 acres of rolling hills, dense woods, and a meandering creek that bisects the southern portion. I'd bought it years ago, specifically for the privacy and the silence, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos of my profession as a state trooper. It was raw land, mostly, with an old, sturdy farmhouse I'd been slowly renovating and a few outbuildings. The key feature, for me, was that it bordered nothing but other large agricultural parcels and a state forest to the west, or at least, it did. About 2 years back, the parcel to my east, a similar-sized tract of old farmland, was sold and rapidly transformed into Golden Meadow Estates, a name so saccharine it made my teeth ache. Suddenly, a grid of unnervingly perfect houses, all adhering to a strict palette of earthy tones, which apparently meant 5 different shades of tan, sprung up where cows used to graze. With it came the inevitable homeowners association, and with that HOA came its self-appointed Grand Marshal of Mundanity, Brenda. My first encounter with Brenda was indirect, a neatly typed note, laminated of course, and affixed to my barbed wire fence with a pristine white zip tie. It politely informed me that the natural rustic aesthetic of my fence line, which was perfectly functional for keeping my non-existent cattle in and hypothetical trespassers out, was somewhat jarring to the visual harmony of Golden Meadow Estates. It suggested I consider a more contemporary split rail or vinyl option to better integrate with the community standard. I remember chuckling, tearing it off, and tossing it into the burn barrel. Community standard? My farm was here before their community was even a gleam in a developer's eye. Brenda herself I first saw a week later. She was standing at the edge of her own perfectly manicured lawn, a lawn that stopped so abruptly at the property line it looked like a green carpet rolled out against the wilder grasses of the buffer zone. She was a vision in what I can only describe as tactical yoga mom attire, expensive leggings, a branded athletic top that looked like it had never seen a bead of sweat, and enormous designer sunglasses that obscured half her face. Her blonde hair was sculpted into an immovable aerodynamic helmet, and she was clutching a phone, probably documenting the offensive existence of a rogue dandelion that had dared to sprout within her line of sight. She didn't see me then, as I was on my tractor, a good distance away, but I filed away the image. She radiated an aura of someone who spent a significant portion of her day searching for things to be outraged by. The subtle escalations began almost immediately. Anonymous complaints, or rather, concerned resident reports, started filtering through to the county about excessive dust from my driveway, a dirt track I'd used for years without issue, or the unpleasant agricultural odors. That would be my compost heap, a good quarter-mile from their nearest McMansion. Then came the direct notices of concern from the Golden Meadow Estates HOA, delivered by Brenda herself, usually when she saw my truck was gone. These weren't official legal documents, just officious-looking printouts with the HOA logo, detailing my alleged transgressions against their sacred covenants. Covenants that, I must reiterate, had absolutely zero jurisdiction over my land. One particularly memorable notice cited unregulated faunal activity, which, after some deciphering, I realized referred to a family of deer I'd seen grazing near our shared, unfenced woodland border. Apparently, deer were not on the approved Golden Meadow Estate's wildlife list. I started a file, labeling it Brenda's Follies. It was amusing, in a head-shaking sort of way, but a small, persistent alarm bell, honed by years in law enforcement, was beginning to ring in the back of my mind. This wasn't just eccentricity. This was a woman with a desperate need for control, and her definition of her territory was clearly expanding. My old neighbor, Jed, a wizened farmer whose land bordered mine to the south, had warned me. That one in charge of the new place, he'd said, squinting towards Golden Meadow, she's got a burr under her saddle bigger'n a beehive, thinks her rules apply to the sunrise. He wasn't wrong. The problem was, Brenda was starting to think her rules applied to me and my black SUV, on my own damn ranch. The black SUV in question was nothing special, a well-maintained but thoroughly unremarkable vehicle I used for errands and for traversing the rougher parts of my property. It was comfortable, reliable, and most importantly to Brenda, I suppose, suspiciously dark-colored. Her obsession with it began subtly. First, it was just mentioned in her HOA incident reports, photocopies of which she'd sometimes leave stuck to my gate, detailing how a dark-colored SUV, possibly black or dark gray, was observed moving at a slow rate of speed along the boundary of Golden Meadow Estates. This, of course, was me, checking my fences or just enjoying a drive on my own land, often hundreds of yards from her precious development. The notices were always penned with a passive-aggressive politeness that set my teeth on edge. For security purposes, we are documenting unfamiliar vehicles in the vicinity. We trust all area landowners share our commitment to vigilance. It was clear she considered my property the vicinity of hers, and therefore under her purview. My trooper instincts, long used to de-escalating domestic squabbles and dealing with individuals whose grasp on reality was tenuous at best, told me to start my own documentation. I already had a few security cameras covering the immediate vicinity of my house and barn, mostly for peace of mind when I was away on long shifts. I decided to reposition one to cover the main access track to my property from the direction of Golden Meadow, and added another, more discreet trail cam along the section of woods that bordered their nature trail, a gravel path they'd bulldozed through what used to be a rather nice stand of oaks. I also, quite professionally, if I may say so myself, did a little open-source intelligence gathering. The Golden Meadow Estates HOA, Articles of Incorporation and Bylaws were public record, available online through the county clerk's office. I spent an evening reading through them, a glass of bourbon in hand. It was a masterpiece of micromanagement, specifying everything from acceptable mailbox designs, Orwellianly uniform, to the precise Pantone color of front doors. Brenda was listed as president. Her husband, a perpetually bewildered-looking man named Gary, was treasurer, and two other names, a Tiffany and a Chad, rounded out the board as secretary and member-at-large. I imagined them as Brenda's loyal, if somewhat dim-witted court. A few weeks later, I had a chance encounter with Gary. I was at the local hardware store, picking up some fencing supplies, when I saw him struggling to load a bag of concrete into the back of a gleaming, oversized pickup truck that looked like it had never seen a speck of mud. He looked stressed. On a whim, I offered to help. "Thanks," he mumbled, wiping sweat from his brow, though it was a cool day. "Brenda's got me on a mission. New retaining wall for the community garden. Has to be perfect." I nodded. "Your wife takes her HOA duties pretty seriously, huh?" He let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 petty regulations. "Seriously? It's her life's work. Sometimes I think she dreams in violation notices." He then, unprompted, launched into a quiet, almost conspiratorial little vent about how Brenda had single-handedly cleaned up the neighborhood, how property values were soaring thanks to her vigilance. He seemed both terrified and in awe of her, a classic enabler. The non-emergency calls started not long after. My colleagues at the dispatch center had a pretty good sense of humor and also a good memory for repeat callers. The first time, my friend Sarah, one of the senior dispatchers, called me on my personal line after her shift. "Hey, my name," she said. "Just a heads up. We got a call earlier from a Brenda last name over at Golden Meadow. Reported a suspicious black SUV lurking near their entrance. Said it was driving real slow, casing the place." I chuckled. "Sarah, that was probably me. My ranch borders them. My personal vehicle is a black SUV." Sarah paused, then burst out laughing. "Oh, for crying out loud. I thought it sounded a bit thin." She was very insistent, though. Wanted a unit dispatched immediately to investigate. This happened twice more over the next month. Each time, dispatch would politely take the information from Brenda, assure her it would be looked into, and then, if I was on duty, one of them might radio me with a smirk in their voice. "Trooper, my last name. Be advised, we have a report of a menacing black SUV operating with extreme prejudice on your own property again." I started making sure my no trespassing signs were freshly cleaned and highly visible, even adding a couple of new, very official-looking metal ones that specified, "Private property. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." I even underlined fullest extent. It seemed Brenda wasn't getting the hint that her imaginary kingdom stopped at her actual property line. The ground was being laid, not by me, but by her own escalating paranoia, for a confrontation that was becoming increasingly inevitable. She was the one building the narrative, brick by paranoid brick. The day it all came to a head was a crisp Saturday in early autumn. The leaves were just starting to turn, and I had the day off, a rare treat. My plan was simple: enjoy the piece of my land, check on a section of fence line near the creek that had been damaged by a falling tree, and maybe get in some target practice at my private range deep in the woods. I was in my aforementioned black SUV, dressed in old jeans, a flannel shirt, and work boots, standard off-duty ranch attire. My service weapon was secured in its usual spot in the vehicle, and my badge and ID were in my wallet in my pocket, more out of habit than any specific premonition. State troopers are generally encouraged, if not required, to be armed and carry credentials even when off-duty, as we are technically peace officers 24/7. It's a responsibility, not a fashion statement. I was about a mile deep into my property, navigating a familiar two-track path that wound through a thick stand of pines, the closest edge of Golden Meadow Estates, a good 3/4 of a mile away, invisible through the trees and over a rise. The only sound was the crunch of pine needles under my tires and the distant caw of a crow. Perfect. That's when I saw it. A flash of pristine, out-of-place white through the trees, parked at a very odd angle just off the track, near where my property clearly transitioned from managed pasture to dense woodland. It was Brenda's Range Rover. My internal sigh was practically audible. What in the Sam Hill was she doing here? This wasn't just peeking over the fence. This was a significant incursion. She must have driven down one of my access laneways, which are clearly marked as private. My annoyance level, usually simmering at a low Brenda being Brenda setting, ratcheted up several notches. This was blatant. I pulled up about 50 yards from her vehicle and killed my engine. I spotted her then, a little further down the track, half hidden behind a large oak, phone held up, unmistakably pointing in my direction. She was documenting. Of course she was. I decided to wait. Let her make the next move. This was my land. I wasn't the one who needed to explain my presence. It didn't take long. She emerged, phone still clutched like a talisman, and began marching towards me with an air of righteous fury. She was dressed in her weekend warrior finest, another expensive athleisure set. This one, a particularly offensive shade of neon pink, hair immaculate, power walking with a purpose that suggested she was about to personally apprehend a most wanted fugitive. As she got closer, I could hear her muttering into her phone, presumably to the 911 dispatcher. The snippets I caught were gold. Yes, the black SUV I've been reporting, acting very suspiciously, deep in the woods. I think he's trying to hide. Definitely not from around here, I'm approaching with caution. Yes, I'll keep you updated. She was playing out her own personal cop drama, and I was apparently the villain. She stopped about 10 feet from my driver's side door, planting her feet firmly, her chin jutting out. You! She declared, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. What are you doing on this property? This is private land. I have already contacted the authorities, and they are en route. She had a triumphant little smirk, as if she'd just cornered a particularly wily badger. I leaned out my window, resting an arm on the sill, affecting an air of bored patience. Ma'am, I said, my voice deliberately calm, with all due respect, you are the one trespassing. This is my property. I gestured vaguely towards a faded but still legible private property sign nailed to a tree just a few yards from where her gleaming white chariot was haphazardly parked. Her smirk faltered, replaced by a look of indignant disbelief. Your property? She scoffed, her voice rising in pitch. Don't be absurd. This land is adjacent to the prestigious Golden Meadow Estates. Your vehicle has been noted on multiple occasions engaging in furtive activities. I am the president of the Homeowners Association, and I demand to see your identification and an explanation for your presence immediately. You are being recorded. She thrust her phone forward emphatically, as if the sheer act of filming me would make me confess to, well, whatever nefarious deeds she'd concocted in her head. The sheer audacity was almost breathtaking. She was on my land, accusing me of trespassing, and demanding my ID. The irony was thicker than the mud on my boots. Just as Brenda was puffing herself up for another volley of accusations, probably something about how my vehicle's tired tread pattern didn't meet Golden Meadow's aesthetic guidelines, a distinct sound cut through the air. It wasn't the chirping of birds or the rustling of leaves. It was the unmistakable professional squawk of a radio, followed by a calm, clear voice from my personal cell phone, which I'd placed on the passenger seat. It was set to a loud ringer for work calls. Trooper, my last name, dispatch. Can you give me a call regarding a 911 hang-up from a female at your approximate location, possibly related to earlier reports from a Mrs. Brenda, last name? My dispatcher, bless her efficient heart, knew I lived out here and often gave me a heads up if something was happening nearby, especially if it sounded like one of Brenda's now infamous, suspicious SUV calls. I picked up the phone. Excuse me a moment, ma'am, I said to Brenda, holding up a hand. Official business. Brenda's jaw, which had been set in a firm line of self-importance, went slack. Her eyes, magnified by her ridiculous sunglasses, darted from my face to the phone and back again. She heard my side of the conversation clearly. Trooper, my last name here, I said, my voice shifting into its professional, on-duty cadence. Yes, Sarah, I got your message. What's the situation? A 911 call from a female complainant, on scene, reporting a suspicious black SUV near Golden Meadow Estates, but actually well on to the old Miller Ranch property? Yes, I believe I have the complainant, a Mrs. Brenda last name, with me right now. She appears to be quite agitated. I looked directly at Brenda as I said this. The color drained from her face, leaving her expensive spray tan looking suddenly orange and artificial. Trooper? She stammered, the word a mere whisper. What? What are you talking about? Are you with the police who are coming? The cogs were turning, but oh so slowly. The idea that I might be the authority she was so desperately trying to summon was clearly not computing. I ended the call with a, thanks, Sarah. I think I can handle it from here. No need to send a unit unless this escalates, but I doubt it will. I turned back to Brenda, whose entire demeanor had deflated like a cheap pool toy. The righteous fury was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. Ma'am, I began, my voice returning to a more conversational, yet undeniably firm tone. As I was attempting to explain before you accused me of various nefarious activities, this is, in fact, my property. I reached into my back pocket, pulled out my wallet, and smoothly extracted my badge and commission card. And I am State Trooper, my full name. Badge number, my badge number. I held them out for her to see. The suspicious black SUV you've been diligently reporting for weeks? That would be my personal vehicle, which I am perfectly entitled to operate on my own land. The land you are currently, and quite significantly, trespassing upon. Brenda stared at the badge, as if it were a venomous snake. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. Then, the meltdown began. It wasn't loud and screechy, not at first. It was more of a choked, sputtering disbelief. No, this isn't. You can't be. Her eyes darted around wildly, as if looking for an escape route or an alternative explanation. This is a trick! You're impersonating an officer! That's a felony! Then, as the full weight of her miscalculation began to sink in, the panic started to bubble up. I am the president of Golden Meadow Estates Homeowners Association. I have a responsibility to my community. I was concerned. That vehicle, it was acting suspiciously. Her voice cracked. I thought you might be armed and dangerous. I told them that. Ah, the armed and dangerous escalation. Classic. That little embellishment was going to bite her. Ma'am, I said, my patience, while considerable, now wearing decidedly thin, your concern has manifested as repeated harassment, trespassing on private property, and today, making a false and quite frankly inflammatory 911 call. You reported a suspicious, possibly armed individual that diverts emergency resources, that puts people at risk. I took a step towards her. You've been warned about making baseless reports. You've ignored clearly posted no trespassing signs. Today, you crossed a line. I could see the local sheriff's department cruiser pulling up the track behind her Range Rover. Sarah, ever cautious, had likely dispatched them as a backup the moment she confirmed I had the complainant in person, just as a matter of procedure. Perfect timing. Two deputies I knew well, Miller and Rodriguez, stepped out, looking mildly perplexed until they saw me. Everything all right here, trooper? My last name? Miller called out. Just peachy, Dave. I replied, just dealing with a little misunderstanding regarding property lines and the appropriate use of the 911 system. I turned back to a now very pale Brenda. Miss, last name, I stated formally. You are being detained for investigation of misuse of emergency services, false reporting, and criminal trespass. As Miller and Rodriguez approached, Brenda finally seemed to grasp the enormity of her folly. She didn't resist when Deputy Rodriguez calmly informed her she was being placed in handcuffs for officer safety and to prevent her departure. The click of the cuffs was a beautifully definitive sound. Watching her being escorted past her ostentatious Range Rover towards the sheriff's cruiser, a woman who moments before had been the self-proclaimed queen of her cul-de-sac, was a moment of profound, if grim, satisfaction. The suburban monarch had been decisively dethroned on my turf by her own spectacularly misguided sense of authority. The fallout for Brenda was, shall we say, significant and deeply satisfying to witness from a distance. The charges that stuck were misuse of emergency services, a Class B misdemeanor in our state, but taken very seriously. Criminal trespass, another misdemeanor, but with her prior warnings from me, it wasn't a good look, and false reporting to a law enforcement agency. Her lawyer, some slick character from the city who probably charged her a fortune, managed to plead her down to probation for the misuse of 911, a hefty fine, mandatory attendance at a civic responsibility and conflict resolution course. The irony was delicious. And a court-ordered restraining order preventing her from coming within 500 feet of me or my property line. Her HOA presidency naturally evaporated overnight. I heard through the county grapevine, which is surprisingly efficient, that there was an emergency Golden Meadow Estates HOA meeting the very next evening. Gary, her husband, apparently looked like he'd aged 10 years and tendered Brenda's resignation via a tearful, pre-written statement. The HOA board, stripped of its fearless leader, reportedly descended into chaos for a few weeks before a retired accountant named Arthur, who lived at the far end of the development and seemed genuinely reasonable, was reluctantly persuaded to take the helm. The news of Brenda's arrest, and the glorious, irony-drenched reason for it, spread through the rural community and Golden Meadow estates like wildfire in a dry field. My old neighbor Jed ambled over the next day with a fresh-baked apple pie and a grin wider than the Mississippi. "Heard you had a little excitement yesterday," he said, eyes twinkling. "Reckon old Brenda finally bit off more than her titanium-plated dentures could chew. Serves her right. Trying to boss the whole damn county." Several other residents of Golden Meadow, people I'd never spoken to, actually left anonymous notes of apology in my mailbox, expressing their embarrassment over Brenda's actions and hoping for more neighborly relations moving forward. Even my colleagues at the state police barracks and the local sheriff's office got a good chuckle out of it. The story of Brenda and the black SUV became minor legend, a cautionary tale about overzealous HOA tyrants. Reflecting on it all, I mostly felt a sense of relief, mixed with a lingering incredulity at the sheer, unadulterated entitlement that had driven Brenda's campaign of petty harassment. It was a stark reminder of how a little bit of perceived power, unmoored from common sense or basic decency, can warp someone's perspective into something truly bizarre. The irony of her calling the cops on a cop for an imaginary crime on his own land was still something I'd shake my head about. I did upgrade my security camera system, adding a few more with better night vision and cloud storage, not because I was truly worried, but more as a deterrent against any potential Brenda disciples or copycat Karens. As they say, an ounce of prevention. The peace and quiet returned to my ranch, deeper and more appreciated than before. My black SUV resumed its guilt-free roaming of my property, no longer a suspicious vehicle, but simply my ride. A few weeks after the incident, I received a formally typed letter on Golden Meadow Estate's HOA letterhead. It was from Arthur, the new president. It was a concise, dignified apology for the unfortunate series of events, and expressed a sincere desire for mutual respect and amicable coexistence moving forward. He even mentioned that the HOA was reviewing its policies to ensure they were more clearly focused within the recognized boundaries of the Golden Meadow Estates community. A small victory for sanity. So, what's your take? Was that the wildest HOA encounter you've ever heard about? Or does Brenda's folly sound strangely familiar? Let me know in the comments below if you think she got her just desserts. And hey, if you enjoyed this little slice of justice, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more stories. You truly never know what's going to happen next in this line of work, or even on your own property. Stay safe out there. Be good to your neighbors, the reasonable ones, anyway. And please, for the love of all that is holy, think twice before you dial 911 because someone's SUV doesn't match your preferred color palette.